Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to another gentle journey into the past. Tonight, we step quietly into another time. A time of candlelight and courtship, silk gloves, and secret glances. We're traveling back to the Victorian era to discover what dating was really like. Oh, and if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. Super curious where you're all listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is. There always blows my mind how people are falling asleep to this all over the world. So, lie back, let your body relax, close your eyes if you haven't already. Let's begin. Not with a wedding or even a proposal, but with the very first step, the introduction. You see, in Victorian times, a gentleman couldn't just approach a lady and strike up conversation, not unless he had been formally introduced. That might happen at a dinner party, a church gathering, or during the London season, the glittering months from spring to summer when high society gathered to see and be seen. The moment of introduction was brief. A bow from the man, a small curtsy from the lady, a name spoken, a glance exchanged. Sometimes that was it. Fleeting, delicate, a quiet beginning. And yet, that single moment could begin a journey that would shape the rest of their lives. But even after an introduction, they still couldn't be alone. No. Proper Victorian etiquette required a chaperone, an aunt, a mother, perhaps an older cousin. Any interactions between an unmarried man and woman had to be watched, guarded, because every word, every look might be scrutinized, and so began what they called calling. If a gentleman was interested, he would present his calling card, a small, elegantly printed rectangle with his name, perhaps his family crest, nothing more. He'd leave it with a servant who would deliver it to the lady's home. If she was interested in seeing him again, she, or more likely her mother, would send an invitation to call on them. But don't picture a casual visit. The young man would arrive at the lady's home, remove his hat, smooth his coat, and enter the parlor. There, under the ever-watchful eye of the chaperone, they would talk. About books, weather, music. Nothing too personal, nothing too bold. It was a delicate ritual, conversation as courtship. And when the visit was over, he would rise, bow once more, and leave. And perhaps he would return. Perhaps many times. Because in the Victorian era, repetition was a sign of interest. Each visit meant something. So, let's pick up where we left off. In the parlor, that hushed and careful space where young couples began to get to know each other. Slowly, deliberately, and always under supervision. Now, if the gentleman's visits continued, if his presence became a regular event in the household's weekly rhythm, then something extraordinary might begin to take shape. Courtship. Still not romance as we know it, but something deeper than a mere acquaintance. You see, in the Victorian mind, love was a serious matter. It was tied up with duty, inheritance, religion, and reputation. A foolish choice could ruin not only a person's heart, but their standing, their finances, even the name of their entire family. But still, in between those strict expectations, something softer stirred. And when words couldn't say enough in the parlor, when a young man had more to offer than small talk about the weather, he might send a letter. Not an email, not a text, not a quick line dashed off in haste, but a true letter, written by hand, in ink, folded carefully, sometimes spritzed with a hint of cologne or tied with ribbon. In these letters, feelings began to take shape, coded, veiled, wrapped in poetic language. Because saying "I love you" outright, that was too bold. Instead, one might write, Your smile lingers in my thoughts long after I've taken my leave. Or, I find myself drawn again and again to the memory of our conversation. And just as the gentleman wrote, the lady might write back, perhaps with the help of a governess or a trusted friend, for it was not always proper for young women to write freely to a suitor. But when they did, her words were just as carefully chosen, every phrase dancing on the edge of what could be said and what was only meant to be guessed. Now, let's talk about flowers. Because the Victorians didn't just send roses for beauty, they sent messages. This was the age of floriography, the language of flowers. A single bloom could carry volumes of hidden meaning. A red rose, passion, a white lily, purity, lavender, devotion, a yellow carnation, rejection, and forget-me-nots? Well, their meaning is right there in the name. Imagine a young woman receiving a small bouquet at her doorstep. No note, only flowers. And yet, within that handful of petals was a confession of feeling, a coded declaration, something her heart would race to understand. Sometimes fans were used the same way. Yes, fans. Those delicate lace-edged accessories women carried to balls and social functions. A tilt to the left, a flick of the wrist, a closed fan pressed to the lips. It all meant something. Entire guides were published to decode fan language. Touching the tip of the fan to the chin? I wish to speak with you. Carrying it open in the left hand? Come and talk to me. Fanning slowly? I am married. Fanning quickly? I am engaged. Dropping the fan? A flirtatious, I belong to you. These were not silly games, but necessary tools in a world where open emotion was taboo, where one had to guard their feelings as closely as they guarded their virtue. Of course, courtship wasn't always easy. Sometimes it dragged on, months, even years, without a clear direction. And sometimes heartbreak came. A suitor might lose interest, or a lady's family might decide a match was unsuitable. Why? Oh, for so many reasons. Not wealthy enough. Not from the right family. Not the right denomination of church. Or simply, not quite respectable. It was a time when reputation was everything. A single whispered rumor could end a budding relationship before it even began. But still, some persisted. Now, imagine it's late spring in London. The city is blooming. The air is laced with coal smoke and lilac. And for those in the upper and middle classes, this means one thing: the season. The London season was a whirlwind of balls, theater nights, luncheons, and garden parties. But underneath all the silk gloves and polished shoes, it was really about one thing: marriage. Young women, freshly out in society, would don their finest dresses and take their places in drawing rooms across the city, hoping to be noticed. Young men, ideally with land or a title, were expected to choose wisely and quickly. But nothing happened without a chaperone. Every outing, every social encounter between a man and a woman of respectable upbringing had to be supervised. A mother, aunt, or older sister would hover nearby, ensuring no impropriety occurred. Even walking in a public park required a watchful eye. Holding hands? Unthinkable. A kiss? Scandalous. But love, as it always does, finds its quiet ways. Some couples found loopholes, brief glances exchanged under the watchful eye of a guardian. Coded phrases slipped into casual conversation. Even secret rendezvous during crowded dances, when a quick whisper could carry more passion than 1,000 love poems. There were carriages, where a young couple might share a short ride across Hyde Park, separated only by the gentlest inches of upholstery. There were walks in the countryside, where a respectful distance might slowly shrink, step by hopeful step. But more often, love grew slowly, in letters, in repeated visits, in the little moments between propriety and privacy. Eventually, if a courtship was going well, and the family approved, a young man would seek permission to formally propose, not with a ring at a restaurant like today. Number. He would often write a letter to the father or request a meeting, humbly asking for his daughter's hand. If the father agreed, the proposal would be made, sometimes in private, sometimes before the family, and a young woman's answer would seal the agreement. And then they were engaged. Now here's where things became a little more familiar. An engagement allowed for just a touch more closeness. The couple might exchange small gifts, books, lockets, even portraits. They might walk together with less distance between them. They could sit side by side without scandal. And the lady was now expected to begin her hope chest, a collection of linens, clothing, and keepsakes she'd bring into her married life. But still, intimacy? That remained forbidden until marriage. Even engaged couples were discouraged from being alone for long periods. There were no overnight stays, no physical contact beyond what could be observed in the parlor. And the engagement wasn't always smooth. It could be broken. With shame, yes, but also with relief, in cases where the match turned sour. Dowries, inheritances, social standing, these could all shift in a moment. And sometimes, hearts broke before wedding bells could ring. But when all went well, when love and duty aligned, the wedding followed. And oh, Victorian weddings. Elegant, measured, laden with tradition. The bride in white, a custom popularized by Queen Victoria herself. The groom in a morning suit. A quiet ceremony in a church, followed by a formal breakfast. Then the carriage ride, and the beginning of married life. Yet love did not always wait for the altar. Some couples defied convention. They eloped to Scotland or ran away to America. Others engaged in secret correspondence, hidden trysts, or quiet defiance of what was expected. Because even in the most tightly laced society, the heart wants what it wants. By now, we've walked the polished drawing rooms and strolled the neatly trimmed parks of upper-class Victorian life. But what about everyone else? Not every couple wore silk gloves and danced in gilded ballrooms. In fact, most Victorians lived quieter, harder, and far less scripted lives. Among the working class, dating was still a ritual, but one grounded more in practicality than poetry. Young men and women met in marketplaces, at church socials, along the docks, or at the textile mills where they worked side by side. There were no chaperones in these circles, just eyes of neighbors, family, and gossiping co-workers. Courting often took place on front stoops, in borrowed Sunday-best outfits with borrowed time between shifts. Their version of romance wasn't less real. It was simply less ornamented. A young man might walk a young woman home from work. He might carry her parcel or offer to fix her gate. A girl might stitch a scarf for her suitor, or bring him a piece of cake she'd saved from the weekend's bake. These were quiet acts of love, earnest, unadorned, and deeply felt. Even so, marriage was still the goal. Victorian values, regardless of class, stressed morality and commitment. A long courtship was expected. Premarital intimacy, if it happened, was often hurried into secrecy or quickly followed by a rushed wedding. But for many working-class couples, marriage was more than romance. It was survival. A woman needed the legal and social protection it offered. A man needed a home and a partner. Together, they could afford a room, raise children, and build something steady amid a world of coal dust and clanging bells. Meanwhile, the middle class sat somewhere between those two worlds. Often caught in the swirl of rising ambition and Victorian propriety, they mimicked the upper class: chaperones, drawing rooms, formal visits, but with less pomp and more practicality. A middle-class girl might host a suitor in her family's parlor with a younger sibling nearby. Letters were exchanged, hands occasionally brushed, and hearts beat nervously under layers of corset and collar. But across all classes, there was one universal language: the love letter. In an age before text messages or even telephones, the written word reigned supreme. A letter wasn't just a message, it was a ritual. Ink carefully chosen, paper perfumed or monogrammed, words rehearsed and rewritten. A well-crafted letter could make a heart race or bring tears to tired eyes. And in those pages, Victorians poured out the feelings they couldn't say aloud. Some were filled with poetic longing. Others were clumsy but sincere. Some were passionate. Some were simple. But all were treasures, tied with ribbons, hidden under pillows, tucked into Bibles, reread by candlelight. And then, there were the secret languages of flowers, hand fans, and even glove etiquette. Did you know that a woman could send a message with just the flick of her wrist? Holding a fan over the right cheek meant yes. Over the left cheek? No. Twirling it in the left hand might mean, I wish to be rid of you. Dropping it? We will be friends. And if a woman rested it against her heart? Oh, that meant, I love you. A bouquet, too, could whisper hidden truths. A red rose? Passion. A yellow rose? Jealousy. Lavender meant distrust. Forget-me-nots? Eternal loyalty. Every bloom had a voice. So while words were few and touches rarer still, the Victorians had built an entire system of romance through symbols, gestures, and coded beauty. And sometimes, just sometimes, it was those tiny moments, the accidental brush of fingertips as a letter was passed, the pause before a farewell, the look held a second too long across a dinner table. That meant more than anything spoken aloud. While Victorian romance often wore a corset of manners and morality, underneath the lace and propriety were feelings that didn't always fit the rules. Some loves were quiet because they had to be. Others were secret, because society wouldn't allow them to breathe in the daylight. Let's begin with the most whispered of romances: same-sex love. In the Victorian world, especially in Britain, these relationships were not just frowned upon. For men, they were criminal. Literally. Under laws like the Labouchere Amendment of 1885, male homosexual acts were punishable by prison. This is the same law that famously led to the tragic downfall of Oscar Wilde, once the toast of London's literary salons, who was arrested, tried, and sentenced for gross indecency in 1895. His love letters to Lord Alfred Douglas, Bosie, were filled with longing, poetry, and pain. But Oscar wasn't alone. Many Victorian men and women who loved their own gender were forced to live double lives. In boarding schools, military academies, drawing rooms, and even royal courts, there were feelings that fluttered behind fans, glances that lingered too long, letters that risked everything. For women, relationships with other women weren't illegal, but they were still hidden. The most famous example might be Anne Lister, known now as the first modern lesbian. She kept detailed diaries in code about her romantic and sexual relationships with women, including her life partner, Anne Walker. Though they couldn't legally marry, and considered themselves spiritually wed in 1834, long before same-sex unions were recognized. Then there were class-crossing romances, the lady who fell for the stable boy, the factory girl who captured a wealthy merchant's heart. In the strict social hierarchy of Victorian life, these relationships weren't just disapproved of, they were nearly impossible. A marriage between social classes brought scandal, whispers, and in many cases, outright disownment. But love didn't always listen to class lines. A governess might fall in love with the son of the household. A maid might catch the eye of the visiting gentleman. Charles Dickens himself fell in love with an actress, Ellen Ternan, after separating from his wife. Their relationship was shrouded in secrecy to protect his reputation, but it lasted for years. And sometimes, the forbidden was pursued not despite the rules, but because of them. There were secret rendezvous in moonlit gardens, smuggled notes, lovers who met behind stage curtains, under the cover of masquerade balls, or within the shadowy stalls of a theater. In this world, a kiss was a rebellion. A touch could risk ruin. And yet, for many, it was worth it. There were also marriages that were anything but romantic. Some Victorian women had no say at all in whom they married. Arranged unions, often made for financial or social reasons, were common. A girl might be wed off at 17 to a man twice her age, chosen by her father, and expected to produce children without complaint. Others faced coercion, threats, or even force. The law was slow to protect women. Marital rape wasn't criminalized. And until the Married Women's Property Act of 1882, a woman's wages and belongings legally belonged to her husband. But in quiet corners, women pushed back. Some refused marriage altogether. Some ran away. Others lived with female companions called Boston marriages, choosing lifelong friendships, or something more, over social convention. And always, behind the curtains and carefully tied ribbons, there were passions that defied their time. Now, dear listener, we'll soon close our eyes on these secret corners of the Victorian heart. But not before we visit the last chapter of our tale. And so we come to the end of many Victorian love stories. Some concluded with lace-trimmed wedding gowns and gold rings, others with handwritten goodbyes sealed with wax. Some never ended at all, just faded quietly behind the veil of time. Let's first visit those who married. For many, a Victorian wedding was not the grand, joy-filled celebration we imagine today. It could be a business agreement, a parental command, or an escape from poverty. But there were also marriages born of true affection, matches formed through a steady correspondence of letters, a courtship of glances, shared poetry, and moonlit walks. A Victorian wedding might be modest or opulent, but almost always included symbolic rituals. The white dress, representing purity, the veil, a nod to modesty, and the bouquet, often made of orange blossoms, symbolizing fertility and happiness. Yet after the ceremony came the true test, married life. And here, reality often replaced the romance. Women were expected to give up much of themselves. A respectable wife stayed home, bore children, and obeyed. Her world shrank to domestic duties, child-rearing, and careful hosting. Passion might fade, and many Victorian women silently endured marriages marked more by duty than devotion. But not all. There were partners who forged quiet, loving companionships, shared books, music, even politics. Some husbands supported their wives' desire for education or writing. And some women, even within marriage, found ways to express themselves through journals, salons, or causes like the suffrage movement. For others, love ended in heartbreak. A young woman might wait for a soldier who never returned. A man might discover his beloved was promised to another. Affairs happened, though they were rarely spoken of. Illegitimate children, secret liaisons, and double lives unfolded behind velvet drapes and polite smiles. For the broken-hearted, there were few outlets. A rejected woman might live forever marked by the scandal of a failed engagement. A man spurned by love might flee to the colonies or bury himself in work or drink. Divorce was scandalous, expensive, and rare, only becoming legal in 1857 and still carrying immense social stigma. But not all stories ended in sorrow. Some couples eloped, defying parents, wealth, and position to marry for love. Gretna Green, just over the Scottish border, became famous for such unions, where young lovers could wed quickly without needing permission. Others chose lifelong companionship without marriage. There were quiet unions built on mutual respect and affection. Domestic partnerships where labels didn't matter. In particular, Boston marriages, two women living together, supporting one another emotionally and financially, offered freedom from the constraints of traditional Victorian roles. And for those who loved in secret, because society wouldn't understand or allow it, their endings were sometimes tragic, but sometimes enduring. They lived quiet lives side by side, wrote poems no one ever read, or carried a lock of hair in a locket, hidden close to the heart. Finally, some chose to remain single, a radical act in Victorian society. Called spinsters, these women often lived with sisters or friends, pursued work, or traveled. Society pitied them, but many lived richly on their own terms. So, what does this all mean? The Victorian age was filled with contradiction, restraint on the surface, but wild emotions beneath. Love existed within a cage of manners, but heart still soared, broke, and burned brightly. Whether it was a letter slipped into a glove, a secret kiss behind a curtain, or a vow whispered under starlight, love found a way. It always does. And now, as our story gently draws to a close, you can rest knowing that even in the most buttoned-up age, love, strange, beautiful, impossible love, was very much alive. So breathe deeply. Let the flicker of gas lamps fade away. Let the clatter of horse-drawn carriages grow distant. And drift into dreams of silk gloves, garden walks, and hearts that beat against the rules of their time. Sleep well, dear listener. The story has ended. But perhaps, in your dreams, it begins again. Good night.